Hey all, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
You are very, very welcome to our content today. We are always doctors of social science who focus on learning about all different kinds of culture as a way to build empathy and work towards more inclusive communities. We do this a lot of ways by looking at pop culture and lived culture around the world. We love to have conversations. We talk to each other literally all the time, but we love to turn on various recording devices and talk with you as well. So make sure you engage with us in any format, liking, subscribing, sharing newsletters, blogs, pictures, Instagram. We're not on TikTok. It's not happening. Don't ask us, but we're pretty much everywhere else. So make sure you let us know what you think of the content. We'd love to speak with you.
This video is part of a conversation that we've been having as we've slowly realized that no one talks about colonization quite as much as we need to. So the Good Doctors have decided to, in fact, have a focused conversation about colonization, and we are going on what we call the Colonizer's World Tour, where we spend a different week in a different country and discuss both art that is made by and about that country, and then also just, some of the facts of what it looks like, in the hope that we would spark some curiosity for y'all, because I will be really honest, this has sparked a lot of curiosity in us doing this series. And as we always do with these videos, let's start off with what we already knew. I, for instance, knew that Guam was an island. And I knew that it was owned by the United States because I grew up with a family at church that was where all three of the daughters were born on the island of Guam. And watching people not understand that they were American was very formative to my understanding of the American empire. So that's what I'm coming in with. What about yourself, Dr. E?
Yeah, samesies. I knew it was an island. I knew we owned it, though I did not know the details of that governance. And I knew that it had a very strong military presence, United States military presence that we will get into. But that's it. So we had quite a void to fill when it came to Guam. We've learned a lot, and we're going to share it with you now. Continuing, this is our final, actually, coverage of Asian American Pacific Islander Month. So we are still in the Pacific Island region of Oceania. Specifically, Guam is located in Micronesia. It is the westernmost point and territory of the United States. It is the largest and southernmost of the Mariana Islands and the largest island of Micronesia. It is a full 8,000 miles from DC, from the capital, Washington, DC, and only 30 miles from top to bottom, but it is very densely populated. It is more densely populated than all but 5 states and US territories, which is crazy. The population is around 168,000 humans. It has several large cities, but the capital is, and I'm going to butcher it even though I have phonetic spelling right here, I'm just saying it right now, Hagatina. I apologize. I don't speak Chamorro. The languages that they have officially, English and Chamorro, which is the language on the Mariana Islands. So they also speak in the Northern Marianas, they speak Chamorro. We have similar ideas, colonial ideas about language on Guam. A lot of indigenous speakers were prevented from speaking Chamorro throughout the early 20th century. We don't know how many people still speak it. In 2010, there was an estimated 25,000 language speakers in the Mariana Islands, which includes the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam. We don't have any updated information on that, but like a lot of indigenous languages, the result of colonization is that they've lost a lot of language speakers over the centuries. Similarly to languages, the largest ethnic group on the island are Chamorro. Then we've got Filipino people, white people coming in towards the end. Chamorro, which are historically known as Chamorro, they're spelled differently, who are related to the Austronesian peoples. They settled on the island about 3,500 years ago. Most aspects of pre-contact indigenous culture have been oppressed and destroyed both by the Spanish and then the Americans. We'll get into that more today and for our piece of art tomorrow. There is a resurgence on the island in preserving any pre-contact history and culture and heritage, or reimagining it, and we'll get into that as well. Their currency is the US dollar because it is United States territory. It is an unincorporated organized territory. Our friends at Geography Now did a much better job of explaining the different types of territories, so I'm just going to tell you to go to their link because I'm not sure I understand it. Just Google it. They have they're a congressional representative in the US Congress, but like DC and Puerto Rico, they cannot vote for president. Their president is Joe Biden, but then they also have governors and lieutenant governors and a US House delegate. We have some movements to make it a commonwealth in the 80s and 90s. There's discussions about Guamanian independence. All happens as what happens with colonies. The religion is mostly Christian, 75% Catholic because Spain, 18% Protestant, and 1% Buddhist, which was interesting but cool. But that follows fairly typical missionary, the Spanish missionaries, and there was a specific Spanish priest that was super involved in that. For the economy, it exists really because of its proximity to a lot of other Asian economies, including it's within 5 hours of Tokyo, Seoul, and Hong Kong. So it's super close to Asia, but it is within the United States. So they get a lot of tourism. That's a big part of the economy, especially from Japan and other parts of Asia. And the US military presence is a huge part of the economy. The US military owns 25% of the land on this tiny island. 1 in 8 residents did or currently serve in the US military. It is one of our most strategic assets, which goes back to its role in the Second World War. And it is the single largest employer on the island, and the economy is entirely reliant on the US military presence. We have some interesting explorations of women and gender roles in Chamorro culture, and traditional gender roles change obviously with colonialism. I mean, because colonialism, but in Chamorro culture, originally the oldest daughter shares power with the oldest son. Male and female roles are distinct but balanced. That is obviously something that has not maintained as much, especially with the role of the church and the gender roles that come within Christianity. It has a high poverty rate, 50% higher than the rest of the United States. Military is a lot of the only way that people can elevate themselves out of under-resourced and impoverished circumstances. LGBTQ rights fall along the United States, really, because it is a territory. The Chamorro people have traditionally accepted homosexuality and transgender people. Chamorro culture was very sexually tolerant society. Homosexuality was never viewed as taboo, but was taken for granted as a part of life. Again, then colonization happened and changed that. Guam became the first overseas territory of the United States to recognize and perform same-sex marriages in 2015. And now they all line up with the rest of the United States. So that's what we learned about Guam from a demographic perspective. But as a Colonizers World Tour, I mentioned the word colonization a lot. Dr. Kristen, what's the history of colonization on Guam?
Excessive. Too long didn't read, it happened a lot. So Guam was discovered in 1530 something by the Spaniards.
Yeah, 1521.
There you go. So it's really hard to discover someplace where people already lived, but sure, Spain.
There you go.
So Spain was there for a long time. And then we had a president named Teddy Roosevelt, you may have heard of him, who was super into conquering everything. And he was a really big Navy guy. And before he was the president, he was the undersecretary of the Navy. And he did a lot of conquering of islands and getting strategic outposts around the Pacific and the Caribbean in order to be completely frank and paraphrasing some of his own journals, build an American empire.
Yeah.
And he wasn't shy about it. We've seemed to be a lot shyer about it since his death, but he was definitely not.
He knew what he was doing. He was vocal about it.
Real intentional. And so America went to war with Spain for a whole bunch of those assets, including the Philippines and Guam. So they had Spain for a couple hundred years. Then they had the United States up until World War II, when Japan, as we often kind of crassly joke, Japan got a Japan.
Japan all over Guam.
Just all over Guam. As colonizers go, the Japanese Empire in World War II is just on the real bad scale of bad. Like,
horrible.
There are benevolent colonizers in a bizarre way that really, they don't want to mess with the people too much. They just want the land.
Yeah.
By all accounts and purposes, the Japanese Empire wanted to mess with the people too, and did a lot of, like, the way that, please watch all the videos we linked, by the way.
Yeah.
As always, as we always ask you, because you get to hear from indigenous Guamanians and Chamorro people, but the way that they speak about those couple of years is different than the way they speak about the American or Spanish occupation.
Yeah.
And it carries, I don't know, just carries something different. So if you caught our video review or my video review of the book, The Rape of Nanking, you get some of the same vibes.
Yeah.
From the Guamanian people, that maybe Nanking wasn't like exactly what happened, but close. So then Japan lost World War II, spoiler alert. And as is often done after wars, the powers then re-divvy up assets, and assets always mean land and people. So the United States got Guam back.
Yep. Liberation. We liberated Guam, kids.
We liberated Guam. And to be frank, when you listen to some of the interviews, we did. We legit did.
We did.
Now, if we were going to truly liberate Guam, then we would have pieced out. But like time immemorial, we liberated and then hung out and like deliberated in a way. But we called it for their own good, because that's a frequent refrain.
That's what colonizers do.
It's kind of our habit. So hung out. And this is really where a lot of the changes of the culture happened. So when you look at the long history, I mean, obviously like the religious aspects and the sexuality aspects, but some of the more insidious stuff that they're fighting back against now is post-World War II, specifically to do with the immense purchase of land by the US military and the lack of compensation for that land. And by purchase, we mean like $1 for 100 acres, not even like $1 an acre, like $1 for 100 acres. And that was even a congressional fight to get people paid. So they just acquired land. They did that old Eddie Izzard sketch where it's like they just showed up, planted a flag, and went, it's yours now.
Yeah.
Kind of all over Guam. So that wasn't great. And one of the really deep side effects of this behavior was a complete disruption of the relationship between the Guamanian people and the land. And so their diet changed. And this happens in other colonized countries, but I'll be really honest, not to the extent it appears to have happened on Guam. And some of that is, I think, just the lack of space they were dealing with.
Yeah.
But I mean, like when I travel to India and I travel to Rwanda, and like, yeah, in Rwanda, I still get some French food, but like I'm getting Rwandan food. Like Malawi has some British stuff, but like really it's Malawi. You go to Guam and it's Spam. And we're not joking. Like that's not even crass. Like it's Spam. And they didn't really have heart disease and diabetes before World War II, and now it's the two largest killers on the island.
Yeah. And
a lot of this, there's some really, really great food sovereignty videos that we're going to link below, both from Guam and then also a really great TEDx talk from TEDx Seattle, I think, right?
Yeah.
Of an indigenous food activist in the continental United States, talking about kind of what that looks like. And we're big food fans here at Abbey Research, big food fans. And one of the reasons that we talk about it so much is that the emotional relationship between self and food is really intense. And I don't think we often give it enough credit. Like one of my very first favorite icebreaker questions is what food makes you feel like you're home? Because we all have those foods. And to deny an entire people group some of those foods changes how they shape themselves and themselves in the world. And the Chamorro people have definitely suffered that. They've suffered an arresting of their relationship with their diet. And in particular, there's an Al Jazeera video down below that has spam in the title. In our like long document that you will be able to link to. Yeah. All of that. There's a video with spam in the title, and if you watch nothing else, I would beg you to watch that one.
Yeah,
because I think that really summarizes a lot of the colonial experience. So in terms of what I learned, I'll be honest, I learned a lot about spam.
Yeah,
and I learned a lot about as I do with all of these videos, I feel like I learn a lot about the land and the relationship with the land. We saw this as well with Papua New Guinea, and as well with the South Pacific Beauty Pageant documentary that we watched, where they talked a lot about land. So I, as a suburban descendant of European immigrants, don't understand my relationship with land in the same way that I should. And that's been a learning journey for me in the last 5 years. And I'm really grateful to all these folks that will stand in front of cameras and explain what land means to them so that I can learn. So for me, all of it comes back to spam and kind of what it means. And then also the incredibly different relationship that people have with spam on some other Pacific islands, including Hawaii. The relationship in Hawaii with spam appears to be different. And we're going to get to Hawaii later on in the year. We're talking to you right now in May. We're going to be talking about Hawaii later on, I think in November. And so we will, put a bookmark in the spam of it all. We'll get back to that. So yeah, Dr. Erin, what did you learn that you are going to take away from?
Yeah, so it relates to spam, but kind of goes a bit beyond that to this idea of food sovereignty. And if you aren't familiar with that term, it's used a lot in Indigenous communities around the United States to talk about the disruption and the impact of colonization on food sources, foodways, the relationship with the land, plants, animals, all of this. And like one of the things I remember learning in my US history class in high school growing up in Colorado, which was a very realistic US history class where we talked a lot about the impact on in the indigenous peoples that we colonized, was the destruction of the American bison. And I don't remember the statistics of how many bison there were like pre-contact, and by 1890 how we had literally decimated is the appropriate term, the population of the American bison, and the disruption that had on indigenous communities that use every part of the American bison as a part of the way that they sustained their life. And so learning about that through the video from Al Jazeera brought up a lot of those ideas that I think it's so important to remember about the impact of colonization, and specifically on Guam. You know, the US military took all the land, and then they couldn't have their normal food sources. And so then the US military brought in spam, which like saved a lot of impoverished Chamorro people. They didn't have anything, but they could access kind of processed food, but it led to this overdependence. And one of the reasons why we see instances in indigenous communities on Guam, in indigenous communities around the United States, higher instances of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, like it's not because Navajo people really love their sweets, y'all. It's because Navajo people don't have grocery stores, and we disrupted their food sovereignty in that way. And it, you know, it damages the environment, it damages the native plants and animals, and then has this negative impact on the health of the indigenous people. So we'll make sure and link in the show notes below the TEDx talk that Dr. Kristen mentioned for TEDx Seattle. And it's a talk on indigenous food sovereignty by Valerie Segrist, who is a member of the Muckleshoot tribe and a native foods educator, should you want to learn more about that. But there's also a Lakota Sioux chef who you can find his social media. He is the Sioux chef, and he is about reclaiming.
Confused with sous chef, which is a position in the kitchen.
Right. So, he is like, Sioux is an indigenous Sioux. Yeah. Yeah. He has a restaurant in Minneapolis where he serves indigenous Sioux food. And it's,
we plan on making a pilgrimage to in the after times.
Yeah, in the after for sure. So make sure, there is this growing indigenous food sovereignty movement in the United States, and certainly we learned on Chamorro as well, which is really cool. But we haven't yet encountered that in our Colonizers World Tour as specifically as we did on Guam. So it's a cool thing to talk about. It's sad, but cool, because I like to focus on the growing food sovereignty movements.
There's a lot of things. If you are into food, as we are, me more so than Dr. Aaron, to be completely honest, the season of Top Chef that's airing right now actually did an entire challenge where they had to cook indigenous food through indigenous methods. So the conversation about indigenous food is also growing and spreading in mainstream or popular food culture as well. And if you are watching this and you are a chef who works with indigenous ingredients anywhere in the world, please know that we would love to talk to you for Welcome to My World, our interview series. And if we can get to you, we would love to eat your food. So
right, please tell us. Please tell us. I think that sums up our Guam 101 video. We'll be talking more about indigeneity on Guam with our short documentary tomorrow, American, it's so hard to say, American Soil, Chamorro Soul.
There you go.
Which is a fantastic documentary that we will have more things to say about our growing Chamorro independence movement with the good doctors.
See you guys then.